With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details. With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18 plus.
Right, hey, how you doing? It's Mick Tilley with the World Martial Arts Television. Welcome to the show. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about sparring and that crazy, crazy world of sparring in martial arts. Nathan, your views on sparring?
Sparring is a big subject. Obviously, it's an integral part of all martial arts and combat sports. Different things to different people, different martial arts. I remember doing karate, and when you did choreographed stuff back and forth, that was like two-step sparring and one-step sparring, and then obviously you get through to, obviously I did a lot of jiu-jitsu, and you're a jiu-jitsu man yourself, and rolling that's a whole different thing. So I think the term, I don't actually like the term that much. I think it's far too broad a term to cover a lot of different things. So I do want to dig into what sparring means to you, and then also maybe some tips for people if they're trying sparring for the first time. And as coaches, like, how do you run sparring sessions? So first thing, when you hear the word sparring, what do you guys think?
I'll tell you right now, coming from Coventry, officially the second most violent city in Europe, if you ever read any martial arts magazine in the noughties or in the 90s or the 80s, you would have heard that line. Sparring, unfortunately, in Coventry normally means, like, I don't know if you've ever seen, when Star Trek got really good when they brought Worf into it for a while, the Klingon. Yeah, that's pretty much what sparring would be. It was it was almost like a blood feud where you'd get two guys, you'd get them in, they'd never met each other, you're training, you let them train for 2 or 3 weeks, they go, we're going to spar. And then all of this real hard work I'd done by, making this really light, frothy sort of environment where we're just punching and kicking, and then we go sparring. And it's almost like Pavlovian, I've got 2 Pavlov's dogs in front of me. You go, we're going to spar now. And then next thing you know, they go like full Roy Shaw, like Lenny McLean on me. They start trying to knock each other out, and you're going, oh, man, I really need a better word than sparring. And like that if you don't mind, that's literally where I want to jump out on that one, for the simple reason that I'm still fighting that battle now. Nathan?
Yeah, so that's my problem. Most people see sparring as a completely separate thing where they're just having a fight. And as lifelong martial artists and coaches, I think we see it as something different. Like, one of my pet hates is when someone comes in the gym and the first question they ask is, oh, when's the sparring? Like, do you do sparring? And I know straight away they're going to be an absolute nightmare. They're not going to be interested in the training at all. They literally just want to beat someone up. And the moment it gets turned on them, they're going to be like, time out, or they're going to be like, oh, I need a water break now, or that kind of thing. I think Mark Goddard said it once, the UFC referee and good jiu-jitsu guy in his own right. He said, most people don't want to have a fight. They want to beat someone up. And whenever someone says to me, oh, I just want to do sparring, I kind of get that vibe off them a lot of the time. Because we've talked before about sparring basically being drilling with somebody, and I think it is sparring people think like technique, drilling, sparring, it's all kind of separate. To me, like live drilling, that just goes, that sparring is part of that. And it's all just variables. You know, you can change the start position, the round time, what techniques are allowed, the intensity, different things. But people think sparring is something completely separate that you do after and it's a fight. And no one good I've ever met or trained with feels that way about it. They're usually like, well, I'm not getting paid and it's not going on my record. So why are we having a fight in the gym? Like, we're training, it's practice. Like, I'm practicing my moves and essentially doing the things I've been drilling with another person. And it's not a separate thing at all. And that's what drives me mad. People think, oh, I'm doing all this stuff and then I just fight. And when I'm fighting, I'm sparring, that's a fight. And I just find it so frustrating that we have this one word that kind of covers all kinds of live training and also the freeform stuff where you can do anything.
But you know what? Just listening to you there just reminds me. This is a bit of a shameless plug, really. If you've never seen my interview with Dan Hardy, watch it, because it was Dan who turned around, and when I asked him, he still has 3 fights on his contract, I'm sure. But remember, we talked about it at your place, Nathan, after he taught a seminar for you, and I was like going, so, you know, fights wise, toughest fights you've ever had, and without missing a beat, he turned around and goes, probably in the gym. And I was like, what? And he went, oh yeah, he goes, and because I said to him, like, you know, we'd gone down the line of any regrets. And he went, yeah, I've got a few. And I couldn't pin him down on the regrets thing. And I said, so, okay, like, toughest fights you've ever had. And without missing a beat, as I said, he went straight and he goes, probably in the gym. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah. He goes, yeah, looking back on it now, I had wars. And like, you know, I'll mention Dan definitely. And I know Daly was the same, Paul Daly. Like, everyone thinks about how explosive Paul Daly was. Like, that was Monday to Friday, like in the gym. That's how, and that leads me on to the whole differentiating what is, as you were saying, Nathan, sparring. I've racked my brain, and I've done, back in the old days, we used to do it if you were just boxing, right? You can only throw a curved strike. You can only throw a straight strike. And that has a level of degree, and then a degree of success. And then the next one was like, right, okay, you can just throw a jab. Okay, you can just throw a hook. And it was, what I found was, it was proper Bruce Lee stuff. The only time I had any real liberation was through real restriction. That it was only when you really stopped them and said, right, okay. And, you know, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu especially, we have this, like, a specific sparring. So literally, like, and that is quite good. But again, that opens up another can of worms where guys go, well, you'll never get me in that position. So why do I need to learn how to defend from the back? You know, and as I said, I want to stay on this topic of, can we find another title for it? Yeah, if we throw it into something else, Kurt.
You know, the you'll never get me in that position to begin with kind of thing is a great point, because I feel like in those scenarios, people stop seeing sparring as a training platform and more of simply a proving ground, right? And I think that's one of the things that we're all talking about, you know. That's the differentiation for me that's really important. I want sparring to be about learning. I want a sparring partner, right? That's the term we use. We don't use opponent. I want a sparring partner who's going to help me. So if I'm eating their jab the whole time, if it's just kind of freestyle, and there's a couple things that I keep walking into, I want a bit of a pause where they're going, hey man, so I keep landing this shot on you, here's why. Or in between rounds, I'm going, I feel like, you know, I keep walking into your jab. Will you give me maybe 70% of that next round so I can really try to focus on that? We're helping each other. So the emphasis isn't, haha, I keep scoring on him, I'm winning. It's helping me figure out where the gaps in my game is, and vice versa, right? So we're using this as a platform to build each other up, not break each other down. And in that regard, I think it's extremely valuable and important to do that. I agree with what Nathan was saying. It's like live drilling in that way or something, right? It's applied drilling or something, if we need a better term for it. It's an extension of that process. We very much do limited tools as part of the process, right? So it's a timing based sparring thing, but it's left versus right, right versus left, punches versus kicks, straight punches versus curve punches, that kind of stuff. And by gamifying it that way, you're forcing them to really look at how good are you at that solitary thing. So their focus isn't on winning or surviving, which is the other side of that, right? Surviving their sparring session, which is even worse, I think. Their focus is on just trying to land the jab or whatever, as an easy example. And you can have somebody who's going, well, I've been throwing a jab for 10 years or something, so I don't need to learn this. And then you put them in that restricted format and you're like, I don't know, where'd that 10 years go? You know what I mean? How come you can't land that shot right now? It's showing you all of these different things about yourself. It's showing you your ass, right? It's showing you where your gaps are and what it is you need to improve, which is really cool. It's super valuable. Once it becomes a platform where it's all ego, someone's trying to win, it's about some perceived level of toughness. And to the original question, what do you think of when you hear the word sparring? Initially when I was young, it just thought of fighting. It's kind of what you would see in the films when we were all growing up. And because of that, there's still so many people that have this insecurity, this fear over sparring, where they're going to have to try to survive that session, right? And I don't like a training platform that somebody has to try to survive. If you're specifically today, we're going to focus on survivability, you know what I mean? We're going to focus on our ability to get through a genuinely violent encounter. Okay, that's fine. It's like a specific modality that you're going through, whatever. But as a regular platform, it just seems like a lot of wasted energy, a lot of potential brain trauma. It's a lot of just inevitable injuries, that kind of thing. And I just feel like it's kind of shitty training. It's not really good. What I was like is, with like Rick Fay, we often talk about what he would always say at the collar group when I was coming up was, I'm not interested in you guys fighting. If you want to fight, go out in the parking lot and fight. Fine, whatever. Like, that's boring. I don't care about that. We're here to have an educated process, and the sparring should be that.
It's funny you said that, because I had to channel my inner Rick Fay at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on Friday. I train at Gracie Barra Erdington's. A big shout out to all the boys there. We have two types of formats. One of them, we just call it live training. So live training, we have to explain to the guys, like, right, okay, this is a 5-minute round. You're going to go. And I always use the same thing. It's an old Rick Fay line, which is, if the person in front of you doesn't look like you're enjoying it, at the very least, lay off it a little bit. So it looks like that, at least if they're not enjoying it, they're not enjoying it as much as they weren't not enjoying it. You understand what I mean? Or how about make it so they enjoy it? So it's entirely up to you. If you've got the upper hand on them, why don't you back off a little bit? There's a couple of young Turks at the bottom of the room there. They're always up for the ruck. So don't hammer this guy who may have had a really hard week, who maybe has taken everything, in his fiber as a person just to drive to the gym, knowing that they're throwing themselves in at the deep end to do 90 minutes of this, right? So that's normally my live training thing. Then I have another speech, which is when we break it down into 3. So it's half an hour of literally free rolling, half an hour of working on stuff you want to do, and then the last half an hour is what we would consider competition training. So you go back to the mattresses. That's one for you, Kurt Cornwell. Bit of a mafia reference there, the Italians there. Sorry if I'm profiling you there a little bit, but you go to the mattresses, and it's just a case of going, right, I only will use the stuff I know that works for me all the time. Like, so instead of these cool escapes that I've seen on YouTube, I'm literally going to frame up, get my knee in, and get back to full guard, half guard, work from there. Just really be limited on that. So back to last Friday, go in there, and I just see guys killing each other, and I'm like, this is going to be the longest 90 minutes of your life, guys. So I sat them all down, and I said, now chill the fuck out. What we're going to do now is we get to do the playlist tonight. Andy's not here. What I would like you to do, guys, is just move around. We all know who wants to rook. So the minute you meet up, you go, you want to go? We go. And just say that. I said, how about that? That's going to be our code tonight. You want to go? I want to go. Let's go. I want to go. I've had a bit of a bad week, because we all know this. You say, do you want to go? And then you get the guy who tells you his life story. Well, my girlfriend left me there recently. I'm not really feeling up to it. You go, okay, mate, obviously you don't want to go. Then just roll around with him, and that's it. And that literally worked dividends for me on Friday. But it was so funny that I had to sit down, like literally 18 grown men in a room and say, guys, guess what? If you're not feeling it tonight, okay. If you are feeling it tonight, go. And it was bizarre. It really, really was. It was an eye opener for me. Kurt, you were going to say?
One thing that we do, especially I think kind of taking a cue from Thai boxing, is when we have a sparring night where you're going to do like heavy conditioning rounds before, right? So we're going to tire you out first. So you're not coming in with the residue of the day, that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? You're not coming in all like, I've been thinking about it all day. Like Nathan, you said, I think it was you that said, most people don't want to get in a fight. They just want to beat somebody up or whatever. I mean, that's a profound line. And so there's people that are going to come in that day raring to go in that regard. So I like to have them completely gassed out and then just let them recover a little bit and then do it, because now they're more primed to look for better targets, to actually work on their timing, work on their positioning, that kind of stuff, right? Really actually feel it out instead of just kind of blasting their way through every round, that sort of thing. And I find, to your point, Mick, of like looking at the person in front of you, we also have to be cautious, at least for what I do, groups that are less invested in the sport aspect. If you've got somebody who's not been around violence, and part of their training is to condition themselves towards or inoculate themselves a bit to the idea of violence for the first time. And now you put them in a sparring format and they're flinching and they're scared and they're, because the person's going too hard and they're covering up, we know how that works. You're attaching that feeling to that experience, and outside, God forbid, if something kicks off for them, that's the type of stuff that's going to come out. If it's true that you fight like you train, then if you've got somebody who's always quote unquote losing in these live sessions, that's what's going to happen for them out in the real world. And I don't know how true that kind of stuff is universally, but I do think it's an important consideration. If you've got somebody who's damn near being bullied on the mat because they're just not ready to go there yet, then they're going to continue to get bullied in the parking lot.
So much from so far there. There's two themes that I kind of picked up there. There was one, basically pre-framing the sparring, whether it's doing the pre-fatiguing or whether it's the talk, but it's the imprecise term of sparring means we need to do a lot of work before we actually let them spar, to get out of it what we're looking to get out of it. And that's what I'm finding I'm having to do a lot. I'm trying to have to explain. And then also you've both mentioned like specific, like position specific stuff in jiu-jitsu, and then maybe jab versus jab in striking. And I think starting a sparring session with that and being like, jab versus defense, then switching, and then jab versus jab, and building up and basically doing progressive stuff is kind of the way to go. And that helps pre-frame when you actually do more free sparring towards the end of the session. But I just feel it takes so much explaining and so much drilling. Like we do things to set the level of contact. Like you put your hands down, you just tap them on the head, and then you move around tapping each other on the head. There's so much you have to do to get them in the place that you want them, where they're actually going to get like timing and distance and like all the goals you want them to get, like learning to use their eyes and getting fight IQ and learning to see things, all the things you want them to get out of it, rather than just hitting each other or choking each other. It seems to take a lot of work to get people to there, and I guess a lot of it's the culture of the gym.
You just said something which is literally the one thing that has plagued all three of us over the years. Like, try to explain what you do. Famously, John Danaher, when he's ever asked when people ask him what he does, he goes, I teach martial arts. For the simple reason, Danaher realizes that it's going to take too long to explain what he does. As I always say this about when people ask me, what do you teach? I'm like, right, by the time I explain actually what I do, so if I explain what Jeet Kune Do is, and I explain this 27 composite arts, and the fact that Bruce Lee wasn't just a really bad actor, in my opinion, he was actually quite a visionary, and he was this absolute pioneer in martial arts. Well, that's Jeet Kune Do. So that's one part we do. So that, where I come from in my lineage, is something that I have to strictly adhere to, because guess what? That's a very important part of our lineage. But where we do all the fun part, that's the Kali part. Why is that? Because there was so many more people doing it. Like Rick Young came out with a classic line where he said that Jeet Kune Do is the collective wisdom from a 32-year-old man before he passed away on what he thought combat was. Kali is literally thousands upon thousands of human beings over thousands and thousands of encounters, learning how to fight, learning how to take lives. And then Rick turned around and goes, that's why they play a lot at Kali, because it's so much more serious. And he goes, and those knives are sharp too. So that, I thought that was quite funny. But that leads me on to the whole thing. It's like, well, explaining sparring to somebody, and you go, right, okay, so if I just taught generic martial arts, okay, for the next 3 minutes, we're going to play at beating each other up. And you can see, you can imagine what their heads are going to be like. Yeah. Beat you up, but play. And then what, as I always say, and this is the thing, striking, when I teach kids, I always say, guess what we're going to play, kids? And they go, what? I say, violent TIG. And they go, wow. And everyone goes, that's amazing. I said, yeah, you play TIG with your mates, haven't you? Okay. So this time you can only TIG each other by punching each other in the head or kicking each other around the, yeah, 9 times out of 10, I always just allow leg kicks, right? And I said, by the way, no big leg kicks, because they're going to come back to haunt you in years to come. No, they won't. Yes, they will. And that's how I frame that. But then with adults, I've found myself personally, but you got to remember, Nathan, I teach this crazy hybrid of a couple of guys think they want to compete until they compete and they realize they don't. So I've got that. And then I've just got hobbyists. So I sort of straddle. Yeah. And when I say hobbyists, I mean that in the nicest possible way. Kurt, everybody who trains with you, they have got jobs. They're never, ever going to make money out of martial arts. This is something they do as a release. Nathan, you are on the other side where you have guys who are young, fit, healthy. Some of them want to compete just for the fun of it. And, you know, Leicester Shoot Fighter is quite well known for getting guys in the UFC. So you have the other side of it. So I'm in that middle ground where I go, let's just play at this. Where, you know, I'm quite lucky because I get to pick both sides. And the bits that I like, great. The bits I don't like, I let go. But it was I'm interested in your take on that, Nathan, because the violent TIG thing and the playfulness, how does that translate into guys who want to fight or compete, either in grappling or in MMA, even worse, in MMA, or you'd be playful there, you might get battered, you know?
Yeah, even though we mostly train recreational people now, obviously we still have people compete in, like, you know, interclub level Thai, white collar boxing, you know, amateur MMA, things like that. And obviously in combat sports, generally the big debate is like light versus hard sparring. Like what percentage should you do? And we've all been there, you know, I'm sure we've all had concussions and we've all had injuries doing hard sparring. And we've also done the lighter stuff as well. And across different combat sports, it's very different. Like the biggest problem I have is people who come from boxing gyms and they're just like, oh, but we just batter each other, we just go hard. And it's like, but it depends what the goal is. Like for me, my experience with boxing gyms is that if someone walks into a boxing gym, and they know, you know what you're doing, you're generally going to get put with the best guy in the room, or if you do well with someone, you're then going to get put with the best guy in the room, and they're going to batter you, right? Because all they're interested in is competitors. And if you get battered a few times and keep coming back, then you go off on that lane, and they give you loads of attention, and the top coaches work with you, and you're going to be a competitor. And if you're not in that lane, then you do your skipping and your bag work and your footwork drills, and maybe you do one-to-ones. But that's it. That's all they're interested in. They've literally got those two ways you can go and nothing else. But I've got everyone at my gym is a paying member. I want to bring everybody up. I don't want to, like in the past, we've kind of had that 2-channel kind of way of doing things where, oh, you either go in the competitor route or you just one of the people on the class kind of thing. But we try and train everyone together now and bring everybody up. So it is hard to still get people ready for competition. I don't think beginners should spar hard at all. I think there's so much that they have to work on in live training that they don't need to be sparring hard. And you can build it up and you can go hard to the body first, and there's different things you can do. You know, but I want them to focus on all the other stuff, literally just keeping their hands up and seeing things come in and working on their defense first before I'd ever let them go hard. But if someone is competing, they do need to. They need to have someone hitting them as hard and fast pretty much as they can. As long as you've got the right protective equipment and you're both at the same level and the same weight, if you're competing, you have to do that. But for the majority of people and for beginners, I don't think they ever really need to go hard.
Excellent points in there. Like one thing that I feel like often gets overlooked, unless it's maybe like a fight gym, a combat sport gym where people are regularly competing, is the skill and size difference between participants in a sparring session. You know what I mean? Where it's not necessarily broken into divisions or weight classes the way it would actually be on the day. You're just sort of training together, you're switching partners around maybe. And so now, you're a beginner, you're 5'8", and now you got this 6'3", 280-pound stud just coming up ready to wail on you, right? And that's not realistic for your sport format. It might be for a violent encounter situation, that sort of thing. But so what are your goals, right? What are you training for or training toward while you're sparring, right? If it's not in service of a specific goal, then I feel like it should be gamified. I agree. If somebody's going to go get in the ring or in a cage or something like that, yeah, they're probably going to have to condition themselves in a specific way with some hard sparring. And that's not my background, but that's the logic stands to reason. But otherwise, yeah, I just don't know that you need to really go down that road if you haven't really determined where your road is leading. You know what I mean? If you haven't determined what you're training for, if you're just training for the love of training, which is sort of my category, I don't need to get a little bit of like mild TBI, just because I love training. That doesn't make sense, right? That's certainly counterproductive. And I feel like that part is just not really well established. I live in a place where Detroit is very much a boxing town, and all the old school gyms here, and even some of the newer ones, we call them bait dogs here, where you sign up or show up at the gym and they're just going to feed you to the fight dogs, and they're going to use you as a bait dog. They're just going to let the fighters beat up on you quite a bit, like you're talking about. And if you can take it, they'll show you some love and they'll give you some attention. And if not, you're just going to be another guy off on the bag doing whatever. And I try to tell my students that all the time, like, this is maybe a distinction, maybe between, let's say, martial art and boxing or something like that, where we're all trying to level each other up for a reason, and that if they were training to compete, the session might feel a lot more boring. It might be kick that heavy bag 500 times. I'll be back later, because you're going to need to like grind a lot of this out, and it's a lot less enjoyable in that way. And so we're, as quote unquote martial artists, we're sort of afforded some opportunities to do things differently, like Mick said, to play. When you're playing in this way, there's a lot of recent studies that show that the brain absorbs far better when you're playing anyways, right? When you're in that state, that's not pseudoscience. That's something that's really proving itself to be true. And big surprise, I always say whenever we discover something as a new idea, they've been doing in the Philippines for like 300 years, they seem to always be ahead of the curve, and that's how that thing works. And, Marcus Wynn and different people that I've spent time with that were rest in peace, are like tip of the spear educators, really, really high level, new wave kind of educators. That's always the format that we worked in. And you get guys that are basically top tier operators they're doing serious drilling and serious things, but they're also training with that sense of play a little bit. So obviously that's a valuable experience. I'm curious from you guys, as we're talking about this, if we could, I started a list. If we could kind of list or categorize different types of sparring, if you could indulge me in that. I don't know if that's boring or if anybody else cares, but I think it could be valuable. It would be for me, but even as a listener, of like understanding the depth that sparring can be. If we know that this is maybe a misnomer, sparring just means one thing when it should maybe have different terms for it. So the first one, Nathan, you had mentioned previously as a choreographed sparring, right? And so as you said off mic, there's a lot of groups, a lot of styles of martial art where everything they do with a partner is called sparring. I get a lot of people that come to me from like the title boxing clubs. They're like the fitness boxing clubs. And I'll ask, what did you do? And they say, well, we used to do a lot of sparring. I'm like, whoa, really? And what they mean is they hit pads, so it's not sparring at all, actually. And I'm not sure why somebody called it that. It sounds like a marketing thing to me, so you feel tough. But choreographed sparring is something that I've never really been exposed to, but I know some styles do it. They're maybe all trying to work to apply a preset combination or something like that. Nathan, have you ever done that, like maybe when you were younger?
Yeah, I mean, when I started in karate, there was a lot of what they call 1 and 2 step sparring. So everyone would be lined up facing their partner in like 2 rows, and then one side would get into a stance, do a set move, stand there while the other person did their counter. And that was like, and maybe you do the first move and they do the counter, then you do your second move and then they do their counter. And it was just kind of trying to get repetitions of repeating those movements. Obviously, I don't now, having done combat sports, think that translates to anything because, I mean, if you've ever seen Matt Thornton stuff on aliveness, if he's not got like a realistic movement, realistic energy, or any timing, it's not something that's ever going to cross over into a free form or competition format. So what sparring is for me now is something different. You were talking about the different types of sparring. You might jump back to them, but I just want to quickly say so the way I look at it is sparring is drilling. This is something that Mick's talked to me about before. And whenever you watch someone really good, they're generally drilling stuff on someone when they're sparring. You mentioned Paul Daly earlier, and Paul said he never spars without he's specifically working on something. When people think someone is just free sparring and doing anything, they're not really. Like, they usually got something they're working on. So I see sparring as drilling, and it's all about variables. Okay, so the variables could be what moves are allowed. It could be the starting position. It could be the goal. It could be the time limit. Literally, we could start head to head really close, and it's like 30 seconds to get like a lead hook to the liver, right? That could be a live drill. But then we could like extend it out a little bit and allow more moves and more moves and more moves. At what point does that drill become sparring? To me, it's all the same thing. Because you might be like, oh, now we're throwing all punches, so that's sparring, but we're not kicking. So is that sparring? Because we're still limiting what's allowed. The one problem that comes in is the intensity, because that's the variable you can't really get across to people. And I literally visually do this, and I talk about dialing it into the person you're with, and to that you're still using good technique and the goal you're trying to get. So to me, sparring is drilling, and drilling is an alive drill and you have the variables, and it could be someone can just do defense and someone can do offense, or someone's allowed to do a takedown versus someone doing punching, and I say it can be a 30-second or a 10-second round. So it could be a 5-minute or a 10-minute round. It could be sweep versus pass in jiu-jitsu. It could be anything, but you're still just picking what's the goal, what's the starting position, how long is it going, what's the level of intensity, and so sparring to me is just all that. It's just live drilling. It's not a separate thing. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
If you don't mind, I'd like to jump in on this. Myself and Nathan have talked about this several times. As I've said before, I've had a couple of guys want to go into the cage, and as soon as I meet them, I'm like, physically, yeah, you could do it. Mentally, I don't know if you're able to do it. So what I have to do is I have to dial it, as Nathan said, dial it right back and get it to go, right, okay, first of all, you're not going to face anything in that cage that you haven't faced with me on a Friday night. And then what I do is I really limit their repertoire. So I do it so it's that case where it's like, now you don't have to do any thinking now. Like, this is from Eric Paulson. So Eric Paulson's whole thing is, your job is not to think. Your job is now to do. So he doesn't let anyone go in there when he was coaching and go, well, I thought maybe I'd do this. No, I'm like dispassionate in this. That I'm on the outside looking in. I said to Nathan, I had a guy, and he put a guy in a wheelchair out of the cage. So the guy couldn't walk out of the cage. He recovered and he was fine. And all this kid had was a 4 count. He had a left 4 count. So inside cut kick, straight right, left hook, big round kick. And in the second round, he was going, I'm having some real success now. I think I might do it. And I said, you think? And I remember saying it at the Sky Dome in Coventry. And I went, you think? And I said, you fucking think? I said, it ain't your job to fucking think, mate. It's your thing it's up to you to finish this. And all he did was that. And I use that all the time to say to guys, if you want to do this, what you do is you don't spar. What you have is you have a succession of drills that get enmeshed. And it's like a flow chart. Yeah? So yes or no. Maybe, no. Yes or no. We deal in specifics. And if you're sparring, as I always say, when you spar, you treat this, and by the way, You guys are going to go, the irony of this, Mick, you're such a fucking hypocrite for what you're going to say right now. So sparring, when I say it, is, guess what? This is a dialogue. This is a conversation between two people. Try and have a conversation with me. I run the fucking show all the time. That I know that's one of my biggest character traits, and it's a bad one, right? And it's like, and it isn't a control thing. It's just when I'm present company accepted. When I'm speaking with most people, I'm thinking, whatever I say is going to be infinitely more interesting than fucking what you're going to tell me, mate. So that's why that's how I am. I'm terrible for that. But when I come to sparring, I say, no. You say this, I say this. You say this, I say this. Now, why I use that is this answers Nathan's point where it's about the intensity. You say this, I say this. You're raising your voice, mate. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Boom. Exclamation mark, normally in the shape of a big right hand or a round kick to their fucking leg. And you go, right, okay, we'll start the conversation again. How are you today, my friend? And that's how we get it. And we work. And then every now I might throw a question mark in, which the question mark is one of those awful punches that just astounds you. So it doesn't even hurt you that much. It's that bit where you're halfway through, you go, that was really fucking good. Now let me think about this for a second. Then we go back to the conversation again. And I use that all the time. People go, do you know what, Mick? That's actually how I now look at sparring. And I'm like, yeah, every now and again, throw the exclamation mark. You'll hear me in class, look at someone, go, exclamation mark. And then one of them gets fucking banged in the head. And then it's like, okay, now we're back using our inside voices again, boys. You know? And but the thing is, sometimes you have to treat people like children because otherwise they're going to hurt themselves. Kurt, you were going to say something, sir?
I like the question mark and exclamation point thing, by the way. I'm going to use those. Yeah, I always try to like point out to my guys that, you know, that intensity thing always like, you'll be the one to start it, but you'll think the other guy did. Right. So, you know, you'll have a situation where one person's going too hard and the other person, and they don't realize it. And the person A is going too hard, person B is going, kind of stepping it up a little bit. I better step it up and match them. And person A goes, they're kind of stepping it up. I better match them. They go, well, no, they're going even harder. I better match. Oh, look, what's his problem? He's going even harder. Like, you know what I mean? It's like a who started it kind of thing between little kids or whatever. It's like you just have to kind of control yourself and be self-aware, which is actually a pretty cool byproduct of this, is developing that self-awareness through sparring, through training, you know, understanding that your tendency is whatever. Even for me, like my stupid face will always look way more intense than I mean it to, you know. And so sometimes I'll be standing in front of somebody and they'll be like, whoa, he's really serious. Like, that's just how my face looks. I can't help that. But I have to be aware of that and maybe be a little, you know, lighter or something like that so that I'm not projecting the wrong thing. A lot of what we're talking about, I always describe this as a JKD thing, as attribute sparring, right? So we're going to play with specific attributes as a martial artist. So timing, distance, speed versus power. You know, both people focused on the same attribute or on different things, and how does that change the dance a little bit? The rhythm, playing with rhythm, you know, and dance, by the way, is a word that I really like in this context, right? So you kind of have to move together with a dance. If two people are dancing and they're just trying to be better at dancing than the other person, they ain't going home together. I'll tell you that much, right? You know, this is one of them's going to moonwalk away from the other one at some point. And so I feel like you kind of have to have that. It should be a cooperative thing that happens, not just a competitive thing that happens. So again, different versions of sparring. And, you know, if you're interested in that too, or anybody listening, you can find the list of JKD attributes. And that's a great like menu or map for sparring or for any kind of drilling for that matter, to look at focusing on those qualities as opposed to focusing on whatever else. And in a sparring session, so often the focus is on winning or surviving or whatever, for people that are not conditioned to it, or if the culture of the gym's not quite right. And so that will give them something else to focus on, as is limiting tools and that kind of stuff. One thing that I think is interesting that I never did coming up is the point sparring. So I've only been really introduced to, I've always been aware of it, but I've only really seen it in more recent years. I've only been exposed to it in more recent years. And it does seem to help throttle back some of the intensity because of the stoppage. And I'm not advocating for point sparring or for it or against it. It's not really my area. But it's interesting in that, like, my observations for it were that it's always like intense right out the gate. You know what I mean? Because everybody's just trying to get that shot off right away. But then the stoppage prevents it from being a real fight. It's more of a game of tag. It is more of a game that way. And there's a group that I work with. It's a national organization called IMS, Innovative Martial Arts Systems, and they have big tournaments and stuff every year. And that's where I've kind of gotten to know a little more about traditional martial art over the last couple of years. And one thing I'll say for the timing sparring groups is they look like they're having a blast. Right? They look like they're having a lot of fun because their stoppage, they're trying for things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to pull off. And I know this is maybe like overly well-trodden territory for martial artists, but I kind of like that aspect of it a little bit, is that it's playful in that way. They're able to try for something that, you know, if they do some crazy jump spinning back kick and they don't land it and they wind up in an awkward position, someone's going to take their back and choke them out. And so, okay, that's important to know. But if on the day you're like, we're going to suspend some of that and just have fun trying to do the jump spinning back kick, I think it's kind of cool, right? If it's your only format, maybe that's not the best thing. But as something in your back pocket, or like, hey, it's our holiday party at the gym, we're going to do point sparring, we're going to play around and have a bit of fun, I think it's kind of interesting in that way. What are you guys' opinions on it? Is it just...
Yeah, I mean, when you said point sparring, I first thought jiu-jitsu, and then I was like, oh no, you mean obviously striking point sparring, which
we'll get there though. I'm curious about that. I was saving that for the end, but yes, please.
Yeah. So I think obviously for speed development and being able to control your techniques, then yeah, point sparring is great. I mean, one of the bad etiquette things of full sparring is throwing things you can't control. So like throwing a spinning back elbow, throwing a teep to the face, things like that, things that you know, something that's unpadded and you're just throwing out there. I always tell people, don't throw head kicks unless you can control them, unless you can, like, even if it's pulling it from like a 60% down to a 40 at that last second because you see them duck down. If you can't do that, I don't want you throwing it in training. Obviously, if you're both good and you're both getting ready for a fight, maybe, but like if you're just working on technique. So I think it develop all that. And also, if you've got points for certain things, it gives people a goal, it gives something to focus on. And that's why I was thinking in jiu-jitsu, because often it's kind of a strange one, because in jiu-jitsu, it's generally like, you know, you time out like 5 or 10 minute rounds and you just roll and you don't keep track of the points. And then people go into competition and someone scores 10 points on them, and then at the end of the match, they just, you know, you look at the board and they got absolutely just wiped. They're like, oh, but he didn't submit me. And it's like, yeah, but there's also points in the competition. Unless you're doing training under those rules, you're not going to win those competitions. So obviously, if you're whatever sport you're competing in, sparring under those rules, and if they're, you know, that's something you should do, especially if there is points involved.
It's funny you said that, because I have literally two views on this, right? So first of all, point fighting in striking, right? I saw more knockouts in point competition, WoCo, which was semi-contact supposedly, and like the classic line is non-contact. He kicked the guy in the head, he got disqualified. Yes, because it was in controlled environment, you fucking mug, right? Guess what? Yeah, throw the kick. And Al Peason's a great example of this, right? So Al Peason always used to say, if you can throw that at 100%, at 90%, you should still be able to change the course of the action. And Al always worked off that. Al said he would throw it, but like for me, Al's still one of the best kickers I've ever met in my life. We do it all the time on demos when we do jump fan kickboxing. And I always, like, when people start kicking high, I get Al to do a low now tech, cross up cross, and then I put that, and I have to stand up on tiptoes like this. And he just stands there like Jean-Claude Van Damme, bangs it up like that. And everyone's like, whoa. And it does two things. First of all, everything that Al says after that regarding kicking, they believe. You know what I mean? That's demonstrated social worth. And then the second thing I always say is, if a guy's nutsack is that high, be his friend. Because we're doing a groin kick, right? You're kicking Yao Ming's taller brother in the balls at that height there, right? But so first of all, as I said, the control thing I really like, because like point fighting was great, because when you were in karate, when I did it, we did wazari, half point, ippon. Ippon you should always look for. So a clean strike with a reverse punch, a gakizuki to the chest, you should have got an ippon for that. And then over the years, what happened was that got changed a little bit. So that became a wazari. And then an ippon, a full point, would be a kick to the head or a sweep to the leg and a finish, right? So that used to be my favorite. I used to, but yeah, I Chunzuki or back Irakan, which is a back fist. So I'd Irakan to the head, both legs would come together, and I had no skill set at all. I just used to boot their legs out from underneath them, and before they landed on the floor, I'd do the big punch, the big demonstrative, ah! And I used to bullshit even me into believing that I'd hit the guy really well. You know what I mean? So I used to get away with that. Then we did continuous sparring. And it was like, Kurt, you said, I really like this bit. You know, you come out of the gate really intense, and the stop. Yes, unfortunately, with continuous sparring, that intensity for fucking 35, 40 seconds with this guy throwing the kitchen sink at you and you having to take every one of those shots. And if you don't drop, you got some guy on the side with a clicker just going like this. Like literally, his thumb's going like this. You go, oh yeah, he hit you 48 times. And you're like, yeah, but none of them hurt. So that was why I got out the continuous. Now for jiu-jitsu, this is the thing. It's like Nathan said, if you don't know the rules, especially the IBJJF rules, they are going right back to the time of Helio Gracie fighting Zulu Zeno. So what it is right, okay, take down, points. Pass guard, points. Take back, 4 points. Why 4 points for the back? Well, you can inflict the most damage in a real fight. And you go, right, okay. And then you find guys that have got guys who've got really good back defense, and you're never going to like do any damage to them, but you got the points. And it's so funny because when Nathan said, when you asked the question, Nathan was going, Nathan said, I was thinking about jiu-jitsu. I had a kid say to me yesterday, one of my kids in my kid class, he was going, oh, I competed last week, I managed to get 12 points. Well, Mick, when you fight, how many points do you go for before you look for a submission? And I went, and this kid's about 9. And I went, how many points? I said, I never look at the points. I said, I only look at the board to see how much longer I got left. I said, if I'm getting battered, do I turn the tide or do I just cover up or do I go for it? And he went, you don't care about the points? And I went, if I'm 27-0 down, I need a sub. If I'm 0-0, I need a sub. And it was really funny because this kid was like, and then, the thing is, the kid's a lovely kid, but he told me so much about him and his mentality from asking me the question, because I was like, right, okay, so how much do you need to do to win the fight without really having to win the fight? You understand what I mean? And maybe I'm profiling him too much. Maybe I've been watching too much Mindhunter or FBI movie. I think I'm in Quantico this week, but maybe I'm profiling the kid a little bit too much, Robert Ressler style. But it was the truth where I was like, yeah, it's the points thing. But then that's the paradox. When it's the points thing, you're not thinking about killing somebody. You're thinking about racking up points, which is a great thing to have for us to get people to calm back down again. So that's my take on the points. But Kurt.
So one of the next categories I was going to mention just to get your feedback on is the weapon sparring. Again, this organization that I teach some seminars with and the friends of mine operate, it's largely a Taekwondo organization, and they introduced in their Taekwondo tournaments stick sparring recently as like a division to do. And there's 2 of the schools, there's maybe I don't know, 20 some schools in the organization, and I think only 2 or 3 of them actually do any Kali, Eskrima kind of stuff. And it's not like modern Arnis the way is often attached to karate schools or whatever. So that's not part of it. They basically just looked at the kids and they were like, they got helmets, they got hand guards, hand protection. Just throw some padded sticks in there. Let's see what happens. If they want to sign up, let them sign up. It's just sort of straightforward. It feels like Bruce Lee being introduced to Kali when you hear those stories from Dan and Asano of like, he just picked up the stick and was like, I don't know, let's fight. We'll figure it out. He didn't need to be taught anything. He just kind of went after it. And so it was a blast. In March, I was at their big national, their biggest tournament. There's 800 participants or something like that. And watching these kids do stick sparring was so fun. I wanted to get out there so bad, but it was so different than what I do as a collie or a screamer person. And it was because it was the point sparring format, right? So when you see stick fighting tournaments, or when you watch the like our niece ones, they have the big like samurai looking gear on, and it's just pop, 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 the whole time. There's like a million shots that they're taking, which for me always, by the way, feels a little bit unrealistic, because most of those shots are going to rip you open. So you're kind of just standing there letting yourself get hit so that you can deal out shots as well. Never quite understood that format. But the point sparring was fun because now you've got some of these like genuinely high level athletes, this like 19-year-old kid who could be a college basketball player, but Taekwondo is his sport, and they're doing point sparring with a stick. So as soon as they say go, most points are for the head, they're immediately leaping 10 feet into the air, trying to drop the tip of the stick onto the back of the other guy's head like that. And I was watching going like, this is not collie. What is this? It almost looked like the French cane fighting or something. Extremely acrobatic and athletic. And it was such a joy to watch. It was interesting because I then taught a seminar on stick sparring, and I realized so many of you don't really know how this thing works. You're just really good at scoring points, right? And so it did create a different dynamic for them, where I was trying to show them how to strategize, and it was a lot of like, I'll be damned, that makes sense. The points that they use is 2 points for the weapon hand and for the head. So you're taking the hand off, or it's a kill shot, and everything else, all the other targets are a single point. And I thought that was interesting too, because I said, how many points for hitting the rear hand, which if you're a collie person, that's harder to do without getting hit. And they said 1. I said, I would have made that 3. How many for the lead foot? 1. I would have made that 4. Like if you're able to get to that foot without getting your head taken off, that's quite a skill, but they're after something completely different. So I think stick sparring is a lot of fun. I'm curious if you guys have done any of it. It's good, so you get exposed to what might feel like if somebody came at you with some sort of weapon or whatever, but mostly I just think it's a blast. The knife sparring, on the other hand, whether it's with a wooden dowel or some sort of padded knife, that we always used when I was training at Rick Fay's gym as a attribute development for lead hand fighting, right? So as a JKD thing. So are you going to, get in a knife fight? Hopefully not. But if you're trying to get speed, dexterity, good timing, good broken rhythm with your lead hand, evasive footwork, a little sense of like, boy, if that actually hit my hand, if that had been real, that would have been terrifying. This is a knife. And some of the conditioning of the fact that if I can survive somebody ripping my hand over and over again, or jabbing into my body over and over again with this wooden dowel, when they're just throwing a boxer's jab, I feel a little more comfortable with that, right? The knife thing was a little more intimidating, or maybe even painful. And now standing and just glove sparring in a nice pace with somebody, you're like, this is okay. I feel a lot more inoculated to this. So I'm personally a really big believer in both of those, but the knife sparring is a big deal to me.
I do both of them, right? So knife sparring, exactly the same as Rick Fay, just use it as attribute training. What I like to do with knife sparring is I like to always go, it's a bit naughty as well. So what I'll do is I'll teach a load of really cool disarms. 9 times out of 10, maybe like do the Palasut drill, stuff like that, knife versus knife, let's go. And then we put the boxing gloves on, or bag gloves, and they go, right, okay, now what you're allowed to do is nothing above the neck, right? I don't want to see any thrusts if possible. Don't mind seeing slashes, but certainly no thrusts. But when you're getting close, you're going to have to thrust, but I don't want you jabbing this into the other person. But I want them to realise that you've broken the distance, and then do one round and go, right, okay, so how many of you disarmed anyone? All gone. And I said, so where's all the fancy stuff? All gone. And then every now and again, and I'm always careful with who I do it with, because I'll watch around and go. And every now and again, I insert myself into the drill for the simple reason that there'll always be one guy in the class who 9 times out of 10 isn't a bad guy, but he's probably, and this is generalization, but they're normally bigger, stronger, tougher, and they've managed to get around with it. But what they don't realize is they have to realize that intensity, and a guy who's got a strategy, and a guy who's prepared to take a shot to give a shot is different. So what we'll do is do all the knife sparring, and because I always wear bag gloves when I do it, knife spar, bang, hit them as hard as I can in the head once. And then they go, oh, fuck. And you can see their face go like that. And I'm like, mate, that's a fucking fake knife. That's a real fucking hand, right? And then they go like that. And then I'm like, why have you put all of your faith into that weapon? And they go, oh my God. And I said, you got to remember, we don't go around. We're not an armed society. Now, on the double stick, I have a completely different ball game on that. What we have is we have the WCAF helmets, and the padded sticks. But if I see any of this, 89, my favorite is the guy who just runs in Heaven Six as the guy loads of times and starts playing the drums like he's fucking Keith Moon on this guy's head, right? When he does that, I'm like, what is that, right? So I get the guys and we just use that for timing. But exactly the same as you, Kurt. The rear hand would get more points, right? And I try and play a Whittick game on the eyeball. So I say, look, the Whittick's the one. Don't be looking for the big caveman strike. The Whittick is the one. And then what I'll do is I say, right, okay, now guess what? Take everything off. Here's the sticks. And then what I do is I channel and homage to him because I'm a big fan of this guy, Mark Denny and Eric Naus. And I go, right, okay, watch this. Just with the sticks, let's go. As soon as the hand's out, I just whack the hand once. I go, where's all your game gone now? And then that's it. Because I don't need to do the dog brother stuff to know it hurts. Like, kudos to those boys. Because they want to do that, great. But guess what? I don't need to be in a car crash to know that that fucking hurts. All I'll do is I'll put my seatbelt on and drive a little bit safer. That's my analogy for life right there. Nathan?
Yeah, I was going to say my only familiarity with weapon sparring is watching the Dog Brothers because of their link through the Machados. I remember watching videos of them. I was wondering like what they did and their full contact, let anything rules kind of sparring. I know that came over here. I think it was the Black Eagle guys did it over here. I was wondering like what kind of influence that's had, whether that's still something that's influencing training now, or because things go through trends. I don't know whether that's something that kind of has gone by the way now, because I don't really hear about that stuff anymore.
Well, sorry, you don't mind me jumping in, Kurt. Only reason I know this is Ryan Groon. You know Ryan, right? So Ryan Groon was one of the Dog Brothers. Really good BJJ guy, really good MMA guy as well. Both him and a guy called Tate Fletcher. I don't know if you remember Tate Fletcher, do you, Kurt? He's one of Joe Rogan's mates now. I think he does Caveman Coffee. I think he's one of those guys who just found one niche, jumped into it, and now he's a multimillionaire. He famously, Tate famously went on the UFC when they were still doing, the Ultimate Fighter program when Bisping was on it. So what you could get is you could get guys who had never ever fought MMA put into the house just because they look pretty tough and they're up for a rook. And it was only when they got in there right at the end that they found out whether or not these guys could fight. And I'm not saying that Tate was the guy who couldn't fight, but Tate's, from what I believe at the time, I think most of Tate's training was with Mark Denny, who, by the way, is an amazing striker and, good grappler as well. But there's that point where it was like you were saying, Nathan, you don't see it anymore for the simple reason that if you want to know the truth, my personal take on it, it isn't palatable for the public. Mark Denny famously has got a picture. He's got a letter from Zuffa from the UFC when he wanted to go in between the fights and do a demonstration fight of the Dog Brothers. And they gave him, the response was, apologies, sir, but you are too violent for the UFC. That was back in the days where you could punch each other in the nutsack, right? In the UFC. That isn't now where it's, if he's got one hand on the floor, you can't knee him in the head. This was like Pride used to look at those early UFC guys and go, what the? And they were kicking each other's heads off like they were fucking soccer balls. You know what I mean? And because Mark Denny sent them some video VHS of them in the park doing the Dog Brother gathering of the pack stuff. And they were like, too violent for us, man. And me personally, I think that's what it is. Because I think that's the last real step. Because I don't know what you guys were like, but the first ever time I saw mixed martial arts for real, like World Combat League level stuff, back in the old days, I remember watching it and going, I'll never do this. This is too much for me. It was too visceral for me. Kurt?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely still out there. Dog Brothers is very much still an organization. And it's enough where I was like, how do I share my opinion on this without somebody from the Dog Brothers killing me, right? Like this is the one group you don't want to. What I think one of the good things to differentiate is, in my opinion, at least as an observer, those are stick fights, not stick sparring. right? And so that being a pretty big difference. They're obviously really having at it. What I think is interesting, and again, this is not somebody on the inside of that, but from the outside looking in, that started at a time where they're going, well, we do a lot of drilling, a lot of cooperative sparring, that kind of stuff. Let's see what happens if we make Kali real, right? If we really make it violent, if we do it, for real or whatever. Which of course that's what Filipino martial art is. So that, not trying to knock them, but that wasn't really a new invention. But okay, so we're gonna kind of go back to the roots and really hit each other with the stick and really get after it. To your point, Mick, of like it's hard to maintain that both as a physical body for an extended period of time and as an enterprise, or much less a commercial enterprise. One thing I've noticed in more recent years is it's become like there's divisions or whatever of Dog Brothers that are more drilling, that are more practice, that are more, so it's Dog Brothers martial art, but without the hard sparring. You're like, so that's where you started, right? It's kind of come full circle, because that's how people are going to learn, and that's how you're going to be able to maintain it. And so I think it's an interesting case study in that regard, right? And I think there's a lot that we can learn from that evolution of that and of that process. I think there's probably some value to that level of fighting. It's certainly interesting, I'm sure, and it's humbling. If you ever watch, like, oh boy, you can find on YouTube, I think it's the SIOC group, where they have their like proper in the woods, like I don't know if it's even supposed to be filmed, these stick fights, and they're like beating the life out of each other, full on blood and guts, head in the mud with the butt of the stick they call the puño just pounding into their head or their face, and it's horribly violent. But it does, even just watching that, you're like, right, that's what violence with a weapon would look like, as opposed to stick sparring, right? It was a very different thing. I'm not interested in doing that. I think it's crazy, but it is insightful or interesting to observe that, even for a brief period of time. I think it's a valuable story in this topic. It's Guru Asano, Dan Asano's story. But when he was a little boy, one of his first instructors, and I want to say, well, I shouldn't say who it is because I don't know that I'll remember right, but he was training with these high level old Eskrima masters and stuff like that when he was a very little boy. So he's 9 years old, something like this, and it's one of his first lessons. And he's sort of famously, the guy's got like the cigarette in his mouth and the stick in his hand. He's okay, here's your first lesson, and he whacks him in the hand. And then in the foot, is it, Mick? I think it's two things. One of them's the hand, the other one's the leg or something like that. And Dan is a little boy, so I'm not advocating this, but he doubles over, throws up, and can't breathe, that kind of thing. And that's the lesson of like, this is how much this hurts, right? This is what happens when you get hit with this thing. You can't breathe, you can't see, you lose your lunch, you lose all sense of time and place. You know what I mean? Like it rattles you that much. For me, all I need is that story. I don't need you to do that to me to learn that that's probably the case, So it's a valuable story in that regard. But again, that's a big difference between fighting and sparring. It's interesting to me that the FMA community right now seems to be in a public phase of the "do you even spar, bro" kind of thing, has suddenly popped up out of nowhere again. So there's a lot of conversation and controversy around that. But yeah, I think it's important. And I think, to my original point, like, even if you're not a weapons person, you might find that stick sparring is a lot of fun, because it is, and that it could really be something that helps support the rest of your game in interesting ways, just as far as a new awareness of distance, of timing, of that kind of stuff.
Well, hey, Kurt, man, you just said something really interesting. The hey, bro, do you even spar thing? But as you said it was really interesting, because it's that I'd like to know if you boys have ever had this. I've had it a couple of times. When I was younger, there was something in me that just, as soon as I hear it, I just go, challenge accepted. And I couldn't help myself. And it was the guy who, he'd always trained in some esoteric martial art. He was a black belt at it, but he couldn't actually remember the name of the guy who gave him his black belt, even though, from what he's telling me, he's rolling around the floor and punched this guy in the nuts several times over half a decade, but couldn't remember the guy's name. So this is the thing, guys. Would spar you, but wouldn't because it was too deadly and he might kill you. Nathan.
Oh my God, so many stories. It's funny because you were saying he's going through the Filipino martial arts are going through this, and I think a lot of martial arts go through this period. So Dog Brothers did it, and obviously MMA is part of it. And I mean, jiu-jitsu transitioning into judo and going, well, we'll take these moves out, but then we'll full spar phase. There are some that haven't, and those are the ones that tend to say it. So as an example, I was at it was like a student fair, like advertising on local businesses, and I was doing my gym then, and at that point I was like rolling a lot, doing a lot of jiu-jitsu, and there was an Aikido group there. And obviously that's one of the martial arts that's not really ever gone through that. But I went over, I'm interested in martial arts. I've done martial arts all my life, and I went over and started chatting to them. And I said, I asked about their training, and they said they've got this master, he's so good. And I said, I do a bit of grappling myself, and they were like, oh no, he could stop any wrestler taking him down. Nobody of any martial art would be able to take him down because he's a master, he's been in this. Yes, I went, well, again, it's that challenge accepted thing. So I went, cool, I'll come down, I'll try and take him down. And if he's that good, I'll come and train there. Like if he's that good. And they're like, no, he's too dangerous. I'm absolutely fine. I've rolled with black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm totally fine. I will be good. And then the guy goes, oh, no, he'll just break your wrist. And I went, oh, we're allowed to break stuff. Cool. Like, I'm like, if you want to do that far, that's fine. But as long as you understand, if I break his arm, that's what you agreed to. Like, if I break his leg, if I just heel hook him or something, snap his leg, you wanted to do that. And he went, no. Like, you have to be a black belt. And I was like, well, yeah, I've got black belts. Like, I've done martial arts a long time. And they were just like, no, it's just too dangerous for you. And I was like, how? It was just, it was absolutely infuriating having a conversation with someone where they've never seen this person to do this thing. No one has ever tried to do this thing against them. And they believe without a shadow of a doubt it'd be too dangerous for anyone to ever try. And it's completely unproven. And there was just excuse after excuse after excuse. And we've all faced these kind of people, whether it's through this phase of pressure testing, as like Jeff Thompson and everyone else did.
Yeah, I always feel like my thing with this sort of stuff, when you get these esoteric arts or individuals like that, as long as people are authentic about what it is they're doing, I never have a problem with it. You know what I mean? Aikido was my first traditional art, and I still kind of have a love for it. I think small joint locks are super interesting. I just love nerding out with them. It's a topic I just enjoy looking at, all the little nuance and variations on theme. It just appeals to my nerd brain or whatever. But I don't think that's how fighting works. You know what I mean? And if I'm teaching it in class, I'm really honest about what these things are and what they're not. And point in fact, my first Aikido teacher, I think I've said on the show before, all the higher up belts, he was a very mysterious guy, and he kind of mysterious cloud of death and, whatever. And whenever he wasn't there, the upper belts would talk about how he would do, this is true, would do CIA missions with Steven Seagal, so that they were partners. and at 14, 15, I was like, this is either awesome or the biggest bunch of bullshit, and it took only like 1 or 2 weeks to realize exactly what it was. But so if you just let the art be what it is, if you let this sort of C-lot thing that you're doing be as interesting as it is, and be such a compelling cultural artifact as it is, it's beautiful. It's phenomenal. It belongs in a museum. Yes, more of it, please, always. But when you're acting like, if I use my ninja skills for real, everybody in here is going to die. You just completely undid everything cool or of value.
A couple of times where I've got two. So the first one is guy, he'd been coming to jiu-jitsu for years up in Warsaw, and he knew every single gangster in Coventry. So he's firing all these names at me about these guys. So, you're from Coventry, all these names. And I'm like, and he's speaking about guys who are friends of mine. He's like, yeah. So I'm thinking, right, and I won't mention names because I actually do like the guy. So, of course, I speak to a few of my friends, and they went, yeah, he's a bit of a fantasist. And I told Neil Simpkin he doesn't need jiu-jitsu because he has enough of a basic grappling game. He just wants to see whether or not his grappling works. So for, I want to say 4 years. Yeah. So after about 6 months, he actually started coming to a couple of classes. He ended up getting his blue belt. And you roll with him, and he was doing, like, he said, look, I roll for the street, Nick. So he's doing crazy ass shit, like trying to can open me, like when I'm in full guard. As he's doing this to me, I can see him setting up. I go, dude, you're gonna fucking just really hurt me. Yeah, but that's what it's all about. And I'm like, right, okay. So literally, same side lapel grip, pull him down, bam, elbow him as hard as I can in the fucking head, and open him up. And then Neil Simpkins says, that wasn't an accident, was it? And I went, that accident's coming every Friday now until this guy fixes up, right? And Neil was laughing. He goes, but you're able to do that because you can just pull this reality thing. So we ended up becoming quite good friends. Yeah, and I like the guy. I really like the guy. Now, the second one is, now this is to my shame, right? So this was, I got into it, like, you guys are like, Kurt, you were training with a guy who may or may not have been going on secret missions with Steven Seagal, but at least you met the guy. Me, I got into sorry for swearing, but I got into there was like a DVD it was probably VHS back in those days. And it was a guy called James McNeil who did, I'm that much of a Philistine. I thought it was called Heising Eye, but it's called Ching He. And they walk that. So, Kurt's laughing, man. He knows this. Like, you see it, and it looks like Heising Eye, and they pronounce it Ching He. And they walk this circle. Don't even know what was happening, but it was on Facebook, and it was one of those groups back in those days where they allowed discourse. Nowadays, people have just gone, looked at it, you disagree with me, block. And of course, if it's someone like me, it's block again, because they just know that I'm not going to take anything seriously. So I'm looking at it and going, look, this looks amazing. But yeah, you're telling me this is a realistic martial art? Come on, mate. And then this guy who's not even a student of this guy, James McNeil, who I've seen his stuff and I think he looks amazing. And as Kurt said, I don't know whether or not it works or not. What is it? Fucking beautiful? Great. Does it look like it's got holistic benefits? The guy moves really well for a guy in his 60s. So I'm saying yes, right? Would it work outside the Bindley Mega Chippy in Coventry on a Friday night against some guy with 8 pints of lager in him? Probably not. So I said, look, I just don't think it's realistic. And then this guy turns around to me and he says, McNeil is ferocious. He said, I've actually seen him. I think he can fight anybody in the UFC. And I went, that's a big stretch for a guy in his 60s, mate. I saw Ron Van Cleef in great shape fight in the UFC and get hammered. And John Van Cleef's an amazing martial artist, but he's not an athlete on that level. And then the guy came out with the classic line, which was, he can rip with his bare hands a watermelon open. Gloves are off, mate. You're not taking this seriously. Why the fuck should I? And I said, what, is there a watermelon division in the UFC? And that was it. He just went absolutely mad. And the reason I've told all that story is he turned around to me, he said, you're nothing but, it was great because it was probably the greatest shit talking that I've ever had from somebody. But, when you look at it, you go, ooh. And I've got a pretty good vocabulary. I'm not Charles Bukowski, but I'm pretty fucking close. He goes, a roustabout. You're nothing but a slubber de Gullion. And I had to get out. I was straight on Google going, fuck me, slubber de Gullion. That sounds like an Irish name. What's that? And then slubber de Gullion is just pretty much a bit of a mess. But it was dead funny because what it did was it illustrated to me the level of cognitive dissonance that somebody will have. Because students don't want to believe that. No one wants to believe they've been training with Jim Jones in a gi. You know what I mean? Kurt, sorry, I went off on the Jim Jones there.
I feel like we need to one day do an episode on like the best shit talking we've ever received, because that's hilarious. Like I've had multiple times where like about to get in a fight and the person says something that's so good that I'm like, never mind, man. That was great. Like we should be friends.
Let's be friends.
You got to give respect when that happens. Yeah, like so you're talking about, seeing your bagua and all these internal. I don't think you're going to use that to fight somebody. Let it be in its place. That's the beauty of martial art, right? Is it checks so many different boxes. It's international cuisine, not just one type of food. So you can use martial art for all these different reasons. You can use it for mental health, physical health, cardiovascular health. Like you can have all these different categories. And there will be an art that's best suited for each of those things. Quite often, I think the trap that so many of these styles or practitioners run into is that like Wing Chun works really well against Wing Chun, but not so great against a boxer or whatever, you know what I mean? Or a jiu-jitsu person for that matter. So it's only being applied against the same thing, right? And so not only is it maybe not being contested at all, but if it is, if there's no way in hell this Xingyi guy is going to be able to deal with an actual MMA fighter, the sheer athleticism alone, the conditioning alone could be the thing that would take it. But you've just never tried your art against somebody like that. JKD is an art that is like wildly political and ridiculous, and there's different factions or whatever, and you get one group that's always insisting on, well, I would just kick them in the nuts and poke them in the eye, and I've trained that so well. Sorry, but I'm so good at this, you'd never be able to XYZ. Like there's a 0% chance that high level jiu-jitsu person is not going to shoot your legs out from underneath you. There's a 0% chance you're going to do what it is you think you're doing, because they just have more flight time. And if it's true, you can't really spar with some of those tools without hurting somebody. There are certain things that could be very dangerous to do to a person. Then we know you don't actually have any flight time in trying to apply it. So the thing is a bit absurd. I feel like you get a lot of schools, a lot of teachers who tell their students, we're so good at this, no one else would be able to blank. Like, Nathan talking about the Aikido guy, and like, not a single wrestler could take him down. That's nonsense. You've never done Aikido against wrestling. You've never tried that. So this is just a thing you've kind of made up in your head and that you now feel really big about, I think it would be more interesting, right? Is there a part of Bagua that's of value? The footwork is quite interesting, actually, right? So, a lot of the stories of Kung Fu people being able to teleport behind you, that comes from that art and the nature of the circular footwork and how strange and evasive it is. If you could distill some of that might be of value to you. Tai Chi, it's a health system, it's everything else, but high level push hands, some of those guys are studs. Their ability to really throw you around a space is actually quite impressive when you see people that are at C-lot stuff that's coming around. And I'm sorry, but it's really just kind of not very great kickboxing. And what's going to happen is, in order to win and excel in these tournaments, some of these people are going to start doing more kickboxing. And bit by bit, they'll use kickboxing for their C-lot to be better, in which case, okay, we've discovered you should have just done kickboxing to begin with if you're going to be in this format, right? So I think at the end of the day, we realize that if you're going to walk around thinking you're, ninjutsu's answer to Jason Bourne or whatever, you'd better be sparring. And if your thing, you can't gun spar. So, a little bit you can, by the way, it's like the soft stuff or whatever. But, if there's things you can't do, then you'd better at least find a way to condition yourself to be able to implement those things and spar the hell out of whatever it is you're able to do against different types of people. My kind of last question for you guys, right? Is it mandatory? What are the benefits to you? And then what are things that people should focus on when they're sparring, or maybe should focus on not doing, etiquette, that kind of thing?
Oh God, there was so much again from that. Like, I really appreciate your take on that there's a place for all the different martial arts. And it sounds insulting to say about them staying in their lane, but like the way you put it, of like actually appreciating what's good about them, that's a much more healthy way to look at it. I definitely agree with all of that. So obviously, as I say, from the discussion at the start, I see sparring just as an extension of live drilling. It's there to build timing, it's there to build confidence, it's there for conditioning. It's practice of your actual techniques in a live situation, and a level of success and then you can keep dialing everything up, but you should still be getting that level of success. If you're going straight in hard and it's all failure, you're getting hit all the time, then there's something wrong. There's a lot of etiquette with striking. You see a lot of, especially at the moment, there's some really high level Thai boxers doing tours and teaching, and there's lots of videos going around of them sparring at the end of the sessions and going, this guy didn't know how to spar. There's really common things of like, it all comes down to safety, a lot of it, and respect. The safety wise, don't run your partner off the mats, don't run them into other people. wear the right equipment. Like the worst thing is like everyone's wearing 16-ounce gloves and someone turns up with 8-ounce gloves on. Everyone's got big shin pads on for Thai boxing and someone brings in some little MMA shin pads. Especially it's the biggest guy in the room doing that as well. Tip wise, yeah, wear the right kit, warm up, go progressively mentally and physically building yourself up, work on defense first, and then build up from there. Respect your partner, respect the coach, relax, and know what the goal of the session is. Why are you doing it at that time, that moment? What is it you're working on? And as much as anything, just try and use your techniques. Use the stuff like it's something we actually literally shout a lot sometimes. Two guys will be rolling around, maybe doing some jiu-jitsu, and we'll be just shout like, we want to see some jiu-jitsu. Let's try using some jiu-jitsu. Or people are striking each other and doing stuff. It's like, I'd really like to see some boxing today. Let's try some boxing techniques. Because that's, because you can get into just using physical attributes. And I would rather see them do that. Obviously the big one is, going too hard or, this is the one going, I'm going light, and then throwing a big bomb and then going light again. And when they throw it back, they go, oh, we're only going light. And it's that escalation. And in jiu-jitsu, the big one is going really, really hard. Just put it on someone, you sit out by the side. Or you get a beginner sometimes going really hard, especially a big guy on top. And then the person will sweep them, get on top. And the moment they get to mount, this person's tapping out and going, oh, no, tapping out. And I usually that person will look up at me, the guy on top, and I was like, just carry on. Like, you can't do that. You can't be going hard and then suddenly going, oh, I'm not ready now. I'm done. I
really like the idea that sparring, a lesson about yourself. You know what I mean? Are you the guy that's going light, hard like that? You know what I mean? And what is it that's in you that makes you want to, I don't want to fight. I want to beat somebody up. What having a template that gives you some sense, it holds a mirror up to yourself and maybe to your ego or whatever, and some of the things that you maybe should be working on, and that this is a practice that can help you work through some of that stuff. It's pretty cool if it gives you that opportunity.
Man, you're saying learning about yourself. If you spar, you're going to get emotional, and it's going to help you deal with that. Don't let the emotions take over and go too hard. Hand up. I've cried after sparring before. I've had people put it on me so hard that I've ended up like that, and you have to learn to deal with that. It's people get a little, get hit a little bit, get emotional, start going hard back, and it's like, no, you got to learn to keep that stuff calm. Don't fight with that anger. Just kind of like, use your techniques.
You were talking about the Thai boxers going around traveling doing seminars. So exactly that same kind of thing, right? It's the emotion part, it's the ego part that gets involved when these guys then start sniping the superstar. One of my favorite videos on the internet is of Senchai. He's sparring he's a younger guy, some kid at one of the US seminars, and the kid starts doing Senchai's moves against him, like his sort of signature things that, the like one-handed cartwheel kicks and stuff that we would associate with him. And he's trying to like big up Senchai in that way and trying to like show him up, that kind of thing. And it's one of my favorite videos because you see it click for Senchai of like, oh, like you're trying to be cute. And he puts the kid into the ropes and just right kicks him into next week. Whop, 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 over and over. And it's such a lesson for this kid. It's like a really humbling experience. Even watching it, you're like, oh, okay, yeah. It's pretty good.
Probably the last thing I'd say on sparring, which is, and it's probably the most neglected thing about sparring, is the reflection afterwards. Like I try and get guys to video their sparring and watch it afterwards, because in the moment you don't really remember everything that happened. And if you don't learn from it, then kind of what was the point in doing it? You should be enjoying the sparring. You should both be having a good time. You should both be smiling a little bit. Literally I'll shout at people like to smile, touch gloves, smile, like enjoy it. If I know Mick, you said earlier, if the other person's like not smiling, not enjoying it, you probably need to tone it down a little bit. And get the good experience in, get the fitness in, get the practice in. But then I think you do need to do that reflection afterwards, and that could be you thinking about what you did and not beating yourself up over it, or it could be someone having a little conversation with you afterwards and letting you know what just happened. But I think that's probably the most neglected thing with sparring. Just
as you were saying about the reflection, at the end of the class on Friday, we sat down and we all get together, and I know everyone will think it's some sort of culty thing. It's a Gracie Barra thing. I've never seen it done anywhere else. Well, not like this, where we actually make a thing of it, where we sit down and we just reflect. And we've talked about this in previous podcasts where, we need to decompress the guys afterwards. We don't want them to jump into the car. We don't want them to jump into the car, drive home full of rage. Literally gave them like 20 seconds, each of them, told them what we did during the roll, where they turned the tide or where I turned the tide. But like they were all freaking out. They were going, "You're like a serial killer, Mick." So you knew. And I went, I don't roll and not reflect on it. I said, every single roll I have, I said, some of you guys, it's like, how can I catch you with this? Other times it's like, oh God, what's he doing that is really good on this? It was really funny because guys were like, so what, you just didn't move on to the next one? And I was like, guys, I know this sounds really Zen Buddhist, but no, all of my other roles will be informed by what I've done. I don't just do it and then let it go. It's like you were saying, Nathan, what do you learn from it if you don't? Yeah, you put it back into the memory bank and then that's it.
That's good advice. I think, we're talking a lot about advice for students or for people when they're going to be sparring, but maybe good advice for us as coaches, hitting the nail on the head there, Nathan, is that taking time for reflection, allowing the times for reflection to have nuggets of wisdom like that come out. People can go, okay, I see what you mean by that, right? You beat yourself, you got in your own way, and this is what happened. Good learning is usually wrapped up by a recap of what we did. I try to do that at the end of every class that I teach. So if you did a little bit of this on the pads and you did some glove drills, whatever, everybody looked great today, that kind of thing. Recapping everything is going to help that stay enmeshed in their brain in a better way, as opposed to just experiencing everything in the moment and then it's gone forever, right? So sort of tying a bow on it at the end, I think is a really good platform, a really good idea for us as teachers. And for sparring, since it is so live, it's a mindfulness exercise things, and you're not necessarily retaining memories because that conscious part of your brain that tries to keep something for later usage is being occupied by a fist. You're using a different part of your brain in those moments, perhaps. And so as a coach, to recap and to tell them what you observed in their sessions, if you were watching them, is valuable for them as well. And then I think soliciting feedback from the group as well. I like to do what was your favorite part, which sometimes puts people on the spot in a funny way. What was your favorite part? It sort of caps the class or the session off with a positive experience, right? So they're sharing something that was fun for them, and everyone walks away going, that was fun, you're right, but maybe more valuable is what's something that you learned in your session. I learned that my hand kept dropping. I learned that I need to work on my timing. I learned that I'm still a little afraid, that kind of stuff. That allows us as coaches to understand what it is that they're working on, right? What are the gaps in their game? If they're going, oh, I learned I need to work more on this, we can do more of that in class next time. We can help them with that. Or I learned that I'm still afraid. Interesting. Okay, here's some wisdom or some advice or whatever. So that gives us an opportunity to engage with the students in a way that's productive for them and helps to reinforce the experience that they had while sparring. So did a good job, I believe, of putting to bed this idea that sparring is fighting, and that sparring is a battle, and it's something that you have to suffer through or whatever, or something that one should be afraid of. It can be all of those things, and there's a time and a place for that, but it is a lot more. It's a practice that certainly could value from better naming, right? From some expanded verbiage. We see this a lot in Sanskrit. I don't recall the number, but let's pick. It's like there's 18 different words for love. It's more than that, but I don't remember the number. 18 different words for love. In the West, we're like love. I love coffee. I love my wife. I love you guys, and I love Jason Bourne or something. You know what I mean? The Karate Kid movies or whatever. That's all the same thing. How is that the same thing? It's not the same thing at all. And this language allows you to express because it is so varied and it is so specific and it's so just like attached to you as an individual. And sparring is like that, isn't it? Right? It's something that is very different for everybody, and there's so many different shapes and forms of it. Each one has value, and I hope that people are engaging with that in their training. And I appreciate you guys giving us so many insights on how to do it effectively.
Social Podcast Network.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.